Hi, welcome to another edition of Dr. Bickmore's YA Wednesday interviews. And today I have as my guest, I have two wonderful people. Carly Heath is our guest author. And also with us today is Gretchen Rumohr, who is one of the curators of Dr. Bickmore's YA Wednesday. In fact, in short order, she's going to be the main curator for a while as I take a hiatus. Well, Carly, it's so great to have you with us today. It's one of those times when we get a book and authors reach out to us, and we are really kind of focused often in our interviews with Dr. Bickmore's YA Wednesday to have debut authors. So tell us a little bit about who Carly is as a person. I mean, why should we want to know you? Of course, there's probably 1,000 reasons, but tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do in the world.
Totally. I'm Carly Heath, and I'm the author of The Reckless Kind, which is my debut novel. I've been working on it. I've been really writing it for like about 7 years. It's been a long journey, as it seems to always be for people who write books and get involved in the publishing industry. But I've been a teacher at the college level for a long time. I teach design primarily. I also teach theater classes and writing classes. So a little bit of everything. And I have been really into historical fiction for a really long time. And I love doing historical research. And so, and I love, historical books and historical settings and everything. So I guess you could say like a way I got kind of started with this particular book and this setting was all of the wonderful things you can find on the internet and reading historical books. I was doing costume design and theater, actually. And so I learned a lot about historical styles and fashion in historical settings. And I even did, for my costume design project, a Much Ado About Nothing costume design project set in the early 1900s. So because of that college class and that project, I was really familiar with the early 1900s. And then later on, I read Christian Lavransdatter, which is Sigrid Undset's famous book set in Norway that won her the Nobel Prize in Literature. I love that book. And so you can kind of think of like the book is kind of a synthesis of a bunch of different interests I had, historical settings, Sigrid Undset's Norway. There's like a big animal theme in the book. I'm really into animals. Anyone who follows me on social media knows I'm always posting my horse pictures and farm animal pictures and everything. And so I guess you could say, who am I? I am someone who's really really in historical stuff, in design, in animals, in the farm, country, rural life. And all of that can be seen in this book.
Oh, yeah. It's what, you're throughout the beginning of this interview, you're going to throw out all these Easter eggs. So all the way we know is that, in the book is set around 1900 in a foreign country, in Norway, in a magic town. Animals play a large role in this. Rural communities play a large role in this. You mentioned theater. Theater plays a large role in this, and so I was, although I've done so much YA the last 15 years, the AP teacher in me my ears kept perking up because you're quoting Shakespeare frequently throughout the book, right? So there's all those things going on. It's quite fascinating. So I'm always stunned by people who have another job and manage to write a book, right?
Yeah.
So when are you doing that? What's your habit as a writer?
Well, my day job and my work kind of changes all the time. And so my writing changes all the time. In fact, when I was writing this book, I was working pretty much full time as a horse trainer. And I was also teaching night classes and teaching online classes for graphic design and video making and writing. And so So I remember I would get up really early in the morning, like 5 a.m. And I would start writing all the horses that I had to ride that day. And then I would quickly change. And then I had a few hours between my night classes that I would teach. So as soon as I got done writing my horses, I would start writing my book, and then I'd have to head off to teach my night classes. And so I actually, probably one of the most creative periods I had was when I was horse training, because I would be riding, like doing this very physical activity, and then I would be thinking about my book the whole time. And because there's this thing with riding horses where it's just very like you're in the flow, like you're not even really thinking, you're just kind of like your body's kind of reacting to what needs to happen in the moment, and so your mind kind of goes elsewhere. And so you can get a lot of just creative ideas while engaged in a physical activity, which I think a lot of people know, whether when you're jogging or when you're cleaning. Like some of your best ideas come to you when you're kind of zoned out doing that work.
And when you're talking about riding a horse, many of our listeners or readers will, want to ride horses or have ridden a horse on a lead, or, I'm thinking about the few times in my life I've been on a horse. I don't really know that I've ever ridden a horse, but you're talking about actually riding it and getting it at different speeds and everything else, aren't you? You're doing all of that.
Yeah, I tend to, while I was training professionally, I tend to take on the horses that everyone else was having trouble with and that had been through many different trainers and wasn't having success being calm and being responsive for its rider and everything. So I do a lot of different disciplines. I was training some horses for Western, some horses for jumping and English. And it's a very, everything with horse riding is all about calmness and is all about like energy and connecting energetically to the horse. And also, and it's a very zen, like I think horse training is like probably the most zen activity, because it's really about turning your mind off and just kind of feeling the energy and like getting into the energy flow with the horse and making the horse happy. Like the whole point with horse training is making the horse as happy as can be, while encouraging them to do behaviors that make everyone happy, make their rider happy, make their, and make them safe for other people.
See, that's one of the things. This is really, because I hadn't guessed that you were a horse trainer by reading this, right? I probably should have read some more, but this would be a really great book for those kids that love the horse books when they're little and everything else. And no spoiler again, but you have a character whose family is involved in horses, who is terrified of horses now.
Yeah.
An accident. So how often have you witnessed that as a trainer? Do you have people that actually have horses that are afraid of them, or their kids are afraid of them? Because I thought that was really well done. That this kid is just afraid, but kind of even knows it's unreasonable to be as afraid as he is, right? So tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind that character. And maybe you go ahead and introduce who this character is, and a little bit about that inspiration now as well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I've had tons of experiences and situations where people acquire a fear of horses because of an accident or because of something bad that happened. And I've even been there. I had a really bad accident actually while I was writing this book, where I broke my back and I had some concussions. So it was pretty serious. And then I had to, after doing the whole recovery process, had to get back on my horse, and doing things a little bit at a time is something that Gunnar does to gradually get used to the situation again. And I had someone in my life at the time who was very aggressively forceful of like, you just got to get over it and just got to, and I don't think that that mindset is very healthy. I think whenever you're overcoming a fear, it's about just a little bit at a time. So like every day, even while I was in the back brace, I would just go out and hang out with my horse. I would put the saddle on her and then take the saddle off and not get on her at all. Just kind of like go through the motions of putting the saddle on, putting the tack on, walk her around like on a lead rope. And then I would kind of put the saddle on, sit on her back, get off again, and just do like little things at a time. And it also helped her too, because she was terrified of having this situation happen again. So yeah, the situation with Gunner in the book, though, is he has a really bad accident. And I had this whole backstory in my head too with him being the oldest brother. He was, this isn't in the book, but I hope this might come out if I ever write a sequel.
Right.
He was, as a child, being taken care of by his mother, who was a farrier, the town farrier. And she, of course, didn't know how to be a mother and take care of a child. She had this work that she had to do.
Right.
So I imagine her just taking him, little baby Gunner, along with her to shoe these horses. And I'm sure he got stepped on. I'm sure he got like burns by touching the, the farrier equipment, got cut by the rasp. Like, I'm sure he had all of these things happen in his childhood that made him extremely anxious around horses. And so he'd never really been a fan of them. And then in the book, he has this really severe accident. And so understandably, I'm sure he's completely now cemented in his idea that if I do anything with horses, I'm going to get severely injured. And so in the book, he knows that he has to eventually ride again, because that's how things are especially in a rural community in the early 1900s. You have to be able to get on a horse to go call for help. You have to be able to be a self-sufficient person who can go places and do things. Especially if he's living in the mountains, he needs to be able to get down the mountain somehow. And he is dealing also with chronic pain and a spine injury and difficulty with his legs. So it is important that he's able to get around somehow. And so he slowly, with the help of his friends too, his friends are extremely understanding of the situation. He slowly overcomes his fear of horses, and not necessarily overcomes. That's actually kind of like a problematic word. He figures out a way to accommodate his fear and do what needs to happen. But his friends are totally understanding and trying to help him have a life where he doesn't necessarily need to work with horses all the time.
That's one of the things that struck me about this book, is in the writing of it, you do manage to have a complicated relationship between two boys who are in love with each other and a girl who maybe is in love with both of them, in different ways.
In love in a platonic sense.
Yeah.
I mean, her relationship with Arlen kind of develops, but she definitely starts off the book loving Gunner in a very platonic, like soulmate sort of way.
Right. And then if those of us that taught high school, kids that have that relationship, right? They're never kind of quite going to be together, but they're kind of always together in what they're doing in life. So I think though that character thing resonated with me about how well crafted I think that character is, with all the complications that go with it. So you start writing this book and you have all these problems. Did you try to carve out 2 hours a day? Are you a page limit? Are you a word limit? Are you, I'm going to write for time?
Yeah, when I was writing this particular book, I didn't set any structure for myself. I just wrote it during the times when I felt inspired to work on it. And if I wasn't feeling inspired that day, I wouldn't. And I think for me, for some people, it's important to have a structure. For me, it's important to not have a structure because I'm just to like write when I'm feeling it, and just to like make art when I'm feeling that inspiration. Because I don't like the like getting into that energy and that mindset where you hate the process of, and I see some people seem to have like a really antagonistic like feeling towards the process of writing or feeling towards the process of making art. And I guess maybe I see this as a teacher, because I teach students who make art and who write as well. And I can see like some of my students, sometimes when they're drawing, they're holding their breath and you can just see like the tension. And something when I was teaching my on-ground campuses that I would say a lot is breathe. It's so important to breathe, because when you hold your breath, your brain thinks that it's dying. And so all of your energy is going to go into survival mode instead of creative mode. And so it's so important when you're in a creative process to make sure that you pay attention to your breathing. I guess maybe I also got this from riding horses. Pay attention to your breathing and check in with your body. Like, are you feeling calm? Are you feeling happy? I have a feeling there's probably some people who are writing and they're holding their breath and they're tightening their stomach, and they're
I'll
like,
have to start asking that question, right? how tense are you as you write? And I've talked to a lot of writers now some who hate the early process but love revision, right? Some that love to get it out and then struggle with the revision process. So I think that people are on that range. So how did you know that you had if you weren't putting these limits on yourself, how did you know you had a draft? And then when you felt like you had a draft, did you go back and say, okay, I've got it now, I'm going to rewrite? Or were you trying to craft the perfect book along the way? I mean, I hear writers like that and I kind of hate them, right? They think they're doing something perfect along the way, but that's never me.
Yeah, I would do a lot of like, I would write like a chapter and then I would go back and reread that chapter and then do a little revising on it and then go into the next chapter. And I knew I had a draft finished when I reached 80,000 words, because I did have in mind like, this manuscript's going to be 80,000 words. So that's kind of the direction I was going, but I didn't force any time limit on myself or any like this has to be done by a certain date. I did remember though that I finished the first draft on Thanksgiving Day of 2014.
Oh.
And because I remember I was on a plane actually, and when I finished the first draft, and I was like, "Oh wow, I finished my draft," and it's Thanksgiving Day.
So you've been living with a draft of this for a long time, and so let's talk about that. So this is a debut novel. So you drafted and you had something you wanted to. You said it's finished. Now that doesn't mean maybe editing and all of that, right? So what's the process between, okay, I have this finished draft and then sending it to agents or publishers? Tell us about that journey.
Yeah, well, finished, it was a draft. If anyone were to read the book, the 2014 version of the book, it is unrecognizable from this. It was a completely different, like it started off kind of third person, and then it was like there was a part 2 was Erlin's point of view, and then part 3 was Asta's point of view. So it was like kind of like 3 distinct. It was, and then the characters' names were all different. The things that happened, the order of events was all different. It was, it's completely different. So after I got that first draft finished, I then spent some time just on my own, knowing what needed to be done and knowing that it needed a substantial amount of revision. And then I was gearing up for Pitch Wars in 2000. I did. Oh, now I remember. In 2015, after doing some revising, I sent out like 5 query letters to agents, and I got 1 full request out of that 5 initial queries. And I knew my book was not quite there yet. And I was really looking forward to the feedback that I would get from a full request. So I waited 3 months for that agent to get back to me. And that agent was actually super nice and gave me really nice feedback on my work. And then by that time it was 2016, and Pitch Wars was coming up in the fall. Mm-hmm. And so I connected with a bunch of other people who were preparing for Pitch Wars, and we all swapped manuscripts. And so that was great to get a whole bunch of feedback on my manuscript. And I did a lot of revising in the lead up to Pitch Wars. Entered Pitch Wars, did not get in. Then I had author mentor match come up and entered that. I also didn't get in, but I connected with other people who I could also swap manuscripts with and get a lot of feedback from. And then in 2017, I connected with my first agent, and that agent was fantastic in giving me so much feedback and helping me revise it to get it ready for sub. Sub is when it gets sent out to editors at different publishing houses. Yeah. And during that process, got some good feedback from editors, made revisions based on that feedback. And then it was on sub with that agent for over a year. And then that agent actually decided to leave the industry. And so I had to query again to get a new agent. Luckily, I got a new agent about a month after I left my previous agent. And that agent then sent it out on sub, and it took another year for the offer from Soho to finally come in. So all told, from the first draft in 2014 to when I got my first offer in 2019, that was 5 years. And then the book didn't come out until now, 2021. So that's another 2 years. So it's been 7 years, 7-year journey with this one.
I think that's, those stories are good. I talked to another author that, people said, don't get discouraged. This book was rejected 30 times. And I think
30 is nothing.
Yeah. And I think people, can have it rejected over and over and over again. There's the famous story that Stephen King, was rejected so many times early on that he used to start putting the rejection notices on the wall. Mm-hmm. And he said, I could wallpaper the room. It wasn't like a few, it was, doing that. So you're talking about working within a community. Did you then have a writing group that started to form, or had you always had one? Or were you taking advantage of some of the organizations that kind of sit around writing? How'd that work for you?
So I think what was really useful in the lead up to Pitch Wars, there was this Facebook group called the Pitch Warriors, and I connected with a lot of people in there, and we all swapped manuscripts and gave each other feedback. So that was really huge. I'm not really involved in any established writing group. I'm a member of Squibby, but yeah, I haven't met any critique partners through them. And so I kind of just connect with people through social media randomly. And I found it really useful in different groups, like the debut group I'm in right now, the Pitch Wars mentor group, and some other groups that I'm in. I just kind of go on there and I'm like, I need someone to read a chapter. Can you read my chapter? Tell me what you think. And then someone else will send me their chapter, and just getting that feedback from a lot of different people is really helpful.
That's great. Well, I people will ask me, well, how do you become a young adult writer? And I and as a critic and as a teacher, I think the only thing I've learned from writers is that writers write regardless of what the pressure is, and some of them write for years before they get something published. Some of them have a wonderful first experience and then really struggle with a second novel. But the people who frame themselves as writers are always writing. They're just compelled to do it. And like you say, they might have a routine between two jobs or get up early. But so that's the advice I tell students when they ask us. I don't know, but writers don't talk about writing. Eventually they write. They're writing something all the time. Right.
Yeah, and and revising, I think, is really, really important. No one is writing a brilliant first draft. I probably finished the first draft on this one in a couple months, And then I spent, what was that, 5 years really doing heavy revisions. And when people would give feedback, like, and say like, I don't understand why this character does this, or this part is boring, instead of being like, I don't know, how dare you criticize my art? I'm like, oh, that's good. That, that's an opportunity to revise this and make this better so that it will connect with more people. Because if multiple people are reading it and thinking, this is slow, or this character's motivation doesn't make sense, then the wider public is going to think that same thing. So it's an opportunity to make it better while you're still in the drafting phase. And it's important to understand too, agents and editors get a lot of manuscripts. And so your manuscript needs to stand out amongst, for agents, in many cases, it's like 4,000, 5,000 manuscripts a year that they get submissions to. So you have to like really make sure that your stuff stands out and engages from the first page.
So let's talk a little bit about The Reckless Kind. So did you envision that you were writing a young adult novel, or were you just trying to write a novel? How did you frame yourself as a writer when you were starting?
Yeah, when I started, I really wasn't thinking about category, and that was kind of a mistake that I made. I was thinking, I had this idea of a book set in Norway with young people. And I remember the ages of my characters kind of changed. Like a really, really early draft I had, Fred was like 13, and even like Gunnar was like 14. And then like Asta was like much older. And so the first draft was kind of a mess as far as the category and the genre go. And then I decided really firmly, okay, I'm going to make this a YA novel. And so refine the characters' ages to YA age. But still, actually, I got feedback from one agent that said this reads a little bit too old. It feels a little bit too adult. And so I did another revision based on that agent's feedback, where I really drilled down on the YA issues and the idea of like adulthood versus childhood, and hung a lantern on the parts. Oh, that's like a little term. Hang a lantern is like when you like advertise and you're writing like, yes, this character is a teenager, but they're doing something that's a very adult like thing, and let the character comment on that. So instead of just like having the character do something that's very adult, like have them say like, oh, wow, it feels like I'm a grown up now that I'm doing this thing.
Yeah, I think this is, as if I were to promote this book, this is the kind of book that I would, I'll do this when I share it, but I will make sure that it gets to the AP Litzer group, right, to do this. Because in some ways, I would say this is on the long side of a lot of young adult novels, right? It's a little bit longer than some, but it reads, when people complain, oh, young adult literature doesn't have any literary quality. That's not the case with this book. This is a book that I think is crafted, it's well written, it has complicated plot and characters. It could easily, you could model all kinds of things that English teachers like to torture their students with, right? I don't think you need to do that to enjoy the read, but it's the kind of thing that sometimes, it's the type of book that I want to say, oh, you don't think YA writing is sophisticated? Well, here you need to read Carly's The Reckless Kind, right? This is a book that shows that people are dealing with craft and taking on difficult subjects and difficult content and really crafting a world that's believable. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to Norway or not, but I believe you've been there. I did all that believability. I was suspending all of it as I went with you on this journey. So,
oh, great. Yeah, that's historical research for you. Yeah. And it's historical research helps you like build the world, even though you've never actually been there. I would love to go to Norway, but I have never actually been there.
Yeah.
I did, though, while I was writing this, I moved to Nebraska, and not for the writing of the book, just for other reasons. And so that was my first time living in snow.
Yeah.
And I learned things as a Californian about like living in the northern climates that were very useful for the book. Like I, as a California horse person, did not know that in other parts of the world, when it's winter, people take the shoes off their horses. And I'm like, oh, that's going to be relevant for my book.
Yeah. Well, so this book, and like we say, there's a lot of things that could hang on this. And when I think this is the one of the book, when we post the blog, we'll link to several of the reviews as well, because I think people, if you're going to review this as a writer, some people would really want to hang on the romantic relationship between characters. So tell us a little bit about that. So you've got this relationship set back in the 1900s, that same-sex attraction, and I got to think it just felt like it flowed kind of a natural connection between these characters, right? And in no way did this book ever feel in relationships heavy-handed, right? So tell me about some of the inspiration between writing a book that I haven't read them yet. I was kind of saying, okay, what's my reaction to this book? But I imagine some people want to say, hold it up as an LGBTQ text, right? So
yeah. So when writing romance, I loved the initial kind of awkwardness between Erland and Gunnar. I didn't want to make it like the internalized like homophobia, like, oh no, I have these feelings and I'm ashamed of these feelings, like that sort of thing. I didn't want that to be part of the story. So I really focused on just kind of these images that came into my head of what drew the two characters together. And something that really helped my writing process with the romance is thinking about love languages, because every character has a different way of expressing their love. And for Erland, it was gift giving. Like I felt that was probably a really important thing for him because he grew up wealthy and his parents are a little bit like, they don't quite get him. And but you could tell that they don't get him, but they're going to give him things to make him happy. And so Erland then took that as, okay, so in order to show your love for someone, you give them things. And so that's a key part of Erland's way of showing his love for Gunnar. And then for Gunnar, he is a very, he's a very like a little bit emotionally reticent, and he has this idea that he has to be stoic all the time because his family kind of has a bit of like a rough mountain type life. And so his love language is just being there, like spending quality time. So Gunnar is always just kind of like being there when Erland is around, and then letting Erland come to him. And so that's probably like my favorite part of building a relationship. But then, yeah, we have to talk about the fact that queer relationships in the early 1900s, definitely there's issues there to approach, because I struggle with saying it wasn't accepted, because as I was doing my historical research, there were communities in historical times that were like enclaves of like bohemian and artistic life, where people from the queer community would kind of flock to, and it would be accepted. Even in like Switzerland, in rural Switzerland, there were same-sex marriages in the 19th century. And it was kind of like accepted. But this is a rural town in Scandinavia. So there is it's not something that people see every day. And the point of view is a little bit more heteropatriarchal. But so one thing I struggled with was like the language in finding my research and finding historical research. So I learned terms like Urianism and contrary sexual instinct and romantic friendships and female husbands. Like these are all like little terms that you can search for on Google Books in like the historical. So you can go on Google Books, you can search like 19th century, you can search like different time periods, and you can use these terms, and then you can come up with a feeling for like, for how the sentiment was around those types of terms. And so I came up with a lot of really cool things. One, I discovered Edward Carpenter, who's awesome. He was born in 1844, and he was an early gay rights activist, and animal rights activist, vegetarian, and socialist. And he would write pamphlets like, so some of the pamphlets were Homogenic Love, Its Place in a Free Society. And he talks about basically same-sex relationships and people who are attracted to the same gender, and not just like these people exist, I am one of them, but like these people exist and it makes society better. And he also wrote a pamphlet called Some Transitional Types of People, and this was all written in like the early 1900s, late 1800s. Yeah. And so he talks about trans people, and that is fascinating because it also explores like how society of the time thought about gender. And so his pamphlets are really interesting and really helped me kind of understand that the idea that the past in Western society was extremely negative towards like any type of homosexual activity was not entirely true. Like people were aware of it, and there were communities of people who were like, this is a part of life, and this is actually a good thing that should be celebrated. And of course, those voices weren't widely published, but you can find them. And I also found an early gay romance called Imrie, which was published, I want to say, in the early 1900s, which is the first gay romance with a happy ending by Xavier Mayne. It was the pseudonym, I forget the author's non-pseudonymous name, but that is a great book to read just because it's two people coming together, and it's very positive, and it's very like, you're exploring the mentality of what they're thinking about the relationship, and it's really great. And it shows too that people back then were exactly the same as they are now.
Yeah. I think that's true, right? It's sometimes we go through eras where we seem to be more accepting or say this is what is, and then we have segments of society that want to react either negatively or positive in kind of loud ways, right? Mm-hmm. The world always hasn't been loud, right? There's in which so I like that as well. I also was fascinated with again, like the tropes that horses and animals and the theater that lives in this small community that these kids are attracted to. All of those kinds of things are really kind of big rewards for the reader. And I thought all those were fascinating. So you tell us a little bit about theater as a motif, and maybe I'm wondering about theater as a place where you can be somebody you're not.
Yeah.
Is it a way in which these characters are trying to figure out how to be who they think they are, mm-hmm. and in some ways their relationship becomes this open play for the community, right? Mm-hmm. Like some of the characters say, duh, we all know they're living together. What do you mean? It's not like for some people, it's not a surprise, and other people want to pretend like it is a surprise. So tell us a little bit about using theater as a motif.
So in my historical research, I found that the theater tends to be a place where unconventional types tend to come together, and it's a community in many ways that attracts those who are artistic and those who are really into exploring what humanity is and who are we, and and I think that people who question things tend to be attracted to the theater. it explores human psychology, and especially for Erland, who is someone who in the book it says he's not into hunting and fishing, he's not into roughhousing with the boys, he's like very sensitive and thoughtful, and he likes to think about things and create art. So his father sets up this theater for him, and that's his way of making friends. And he's very just into studying Shakespeare, and he's very into just like learning about the theater and plays. And in many ways, he's very in his head all the time. And so like I've said, in my historical research, I found that this is a common trope that has happened throughout history. Like unconventional people tend to be drawn to the theater, and there's the community that forms around it tends to be more open to rejecting the heteropatriarchal way of doing things. And queer people tend to flock to the theater, I think, for many of these reasons, especially like Asta is saying, like she loves wearing makeup and wearing wigs and exploring what she looks like, because her appearance is very unconventional. And something that she does in the book is she dyes her hair as a way of, she no longer has the theater makeup and the wigs and the costumes, but she can alter her appearance in some way to make herself who she wants to be by dyeing her hair in this very unconventional way. And so, yeah, those are kind of like the thoughts that were coming into my head as I was building their kind of relationship around the theater. And it's really interesting that throughout history, like just as it is now, just as it has been in the 1900s, like the theater tends to be something that attracts unconventional people.
Well, that's, I found it, there were a lot of really fascinating things for me, because I as most people who follow what I do, mostly, I tend to read young adult fiction that's older, written for the older group. This certainly fits into that. I tend to focus on things that focus on race, class, and gender, although race and class more often than gender for me, right? But this one then fits this mold of where I'm reading older YA and doing this. It reminded me of talking to kids who became interested in Oscar Wilde and other things. I thought, this is a perfect, for me, it was a perfect bridge for those kinds of books that we don't have enough of these, I think, to point kids to, right? Because it's not the early introduction to an LGBTQ issue where it's discovery and those kinds of things. It just seems like it's a natural flow of who these characters are. And you could read this book and say, well, this book isn't about LGBTQ issues at all. It's about rejection from family, or it's about overcoming obstacles. And I wish I would have almost read the medical notes last, but in here you cover 3 different kinds of at least and the limitations of, when you talk about language, 3 different medical conditions that your characters are all exploring. So in some ways, this is a book that when people are talking about how are people that are other able or who are struggling with a medical condition that most people aren't familiar with, I think you do a really nice job of hinting around the edges without saying in an aside, oh, dear reader, here's, we're aware that people, that Fred is really suffering from these concussions, and Gunnar has had this terrible accident. And, so is this book for you? Is that one of the key focuses is the otherness of these characters struggling with?
Yeah. So something I've been thinking about a lot in many years is that, like, everyone I know in my friend group, I don't know if it's because I hang around horses and horses injure people all the time, but everyone I know is disabled in some way. Like, I literally cannot think of one friend I have who is not disabled. And it might be a invisible disability, like a mental illness, or it might be a physical disability where, like, they can't use their arm because it's either something that they've been born with or an injury that they've had. So, but I was very aware of, in media and in books, you don't see a disability represented like at all. Like all the characters tend to be completely abled. And if there is a disability, it's like only one thing. Whereas I personally have multiple disabilities. I'm hard of hearing and I wear hearing aids, and I have a spinal injury, and I have concussions, a post-concussion syndrome, and I have a hand that like is a little crooked now. So I'm also super anxious. So I wanted to have characters that were realistically like disabled in the way that people are in real life. And also being aware that this is the 1900s, medical science isn't what it is now. So the language isn't there. Like Asta has Waardenburg syndrome, but there's no word for Waardenburg syndrome in the early 1900s. It wasn't the word wasn't given until like the 1940s. And so I was like really curious, like what do people back then think when someone has this condition, but they have no word for what the condition is? And a lot of my findings when I was like looking at historical medical research, especially for if there's women who are disabled or who have an injury or who have just a medical condition, it's often treated as a character flaw or a inherent spiritual flaw in that woman. Like, so she's just blamed for if she has a medical condition, like, oh, that's just because you have failed some way. So that's why you suffer. And for men, they had back then, they would always be taken care of by the women in society. But if a woman was disabled, she was kind of expected to just carry on and do her duties anyway. And if she wasn't able to carry on, then she was kind of, like, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you, she would be criticized much more harshly than a male character would. And she'd be thought of as a burden than a male character would back in the day. So yeah, it was interesting to explore, like, how do people think of themselves and how does society think of people when people have these medical conditions and there's no word for it. And also that kind of like, I guess you could say it's like a supernatural, superstitious attitude towards medicine, where it's like, well, God will, if it's God's will, you'll get better, or, you'll get better if you are a good Christian, so that sort of side of things was kind of interesting to play with as well.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think we think that in the, a century and 30 years ago, that may have well been the case, that people, they might have said, well, God's will be done, but it didn't stop them from trying to find a solution or working through it, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we have this accident, but we still have to get up tomorrow, or, or we still have to eat. And what are we going to do about that? Well, Carly, as I'm sitting here thinking about this is a book that I hope gets play in the world, right? And so I'm thinking about how to introduce it in a blog, and what do I talk about? Because this is a book that I could see lots of kids really liking if we can get to it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's often the problem. Gretchen, do you have any questions or things that I've missed? I think we've covered, there's a lot of issues, the wonderful historical nature of the book, the LGBTQ issues, the issues of health and other ablenesses throughout this, the family struggles and trauma, defining and reorganizing family becomes interesting to play here. But Gretchen, do you think of anything else we should talk about, or have you just been along for the comfortable ride here, Gretchen?
I'm reveling in this conversation and listening to a sleeping dog next to me. I would say it would be really interesting to check back with you once the book has been out for a little while, because one question that we love asking YA authors is, what are some of your favorite letters you've received?
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like when you get that feedback from a reader, you're able to really ascertain what the impact of that work is. And so I have loved listening to you talk about the kinds of the the kind of rich community that you desired to build in the book, to help students who read this book feel like they belong and can belong, and help them to seek relationships that really bring them life and acceptance versus shame and feeling like an outsider. So
that's actually a really good point. Something I wanted to do in the book is model positive relationships and accommodating relationships. Like, there's a tendency sometimes as a writer to let me expose the most awful side of toxic human behavior, where someone is not accepting and where someone is rigid in their point of view. Whereas I wanted to show, like, okay, what would it be like if a group of friends is like fully committed to each other, and their relationship, I mean, there's complications in their relationship, but their love for each other is not complicated, and they're constantly thinking about what they can do for the other person. Because I think that's something I would love to see more people do in the world, is think about, like, what can I do for someone else to make their life better?
And this keep again posted on what your readers say.
We would love to hear more. And again, this book is The Reckless Kind. It's Carly Heath's first book. Yeah, we all have our copies here. And its debut date is November the 9th, right? It's just around the corner. And we hope to post this Friday or Monday, depending on how busy we both are.
We can celebrate your book birthday that day.
And we want it to be out in the world before that. And certainly we're going to do what we can to kind of spark some attention around the book. And we wish you the best of luck. And so one final thing, have you got another one in the works?
Yes.
So where are you with that?
So I have another manuscript that's finished, and I'm in the process of revising it, of course. But yeah, it's a YA fantasy. It's also set in Scandinavia, but this time it deals with magic and sorcery. And so that is going to be really exciting. And we'll see what happens with that one. That one will be, it hasn't been announced yet, but that's what I'm working on.
That's good. So we'll keep us posted on that. Thank you so much. It's been great to chat with you, and we want to find out what happens along the way.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, both of you. It's been nice talking to you, Steve and Gretchen.